Health Grade channel. I'm your biology teacher Aishwarya and I welcome you to today's class, which is going to be on transportation in living organisms, and we're going to cover the whole bit of transportation at one shot. So what are all the things that we're going to cover in today's class? We will cover the human circulatory system, we will do double circulation, we're going to do lymph and lymphatic system, and we will cover transportation in plants. And very specifically, whatever is necessary for your board examinations, we are going to cover those topics in great detail. So please make sure you have your notebooks, your pens, your textbooks, everything ready, because I will be telling you what are all the important things that you need, what are all the most likely questions that you are going to get from this particular topic. So I hope all of you are ready and excited. Now very quickly everybody, I hope that my audio, my video and my screen and what I'm writing on the screen is visible to all of you. If it is, please do give me a quick thumbs up. Now I do understand that a lot of you in the live chat right now had to be waiting for quite some time because of the technical issues, and I sincerely, of course, I am very happy that all of you waited, and I'm telling you, in the next 1 hour, our aim is that in the next 60 minutes we cover all the topics that I just told you about. Yes? So everybody give me a quick thumbs up in the live chat to let me know that we are good to go. Now a few things that I want to keep in mind, yes, is that first and foremost, in-depth detailed sessions for human circulatory system and double circulation has already been done on the channel by Ankita ma'am. So if you want in-depth concept explanations, you can of course watch those videos, yes. But now at the same time, today, like I told you, I will be telling you what is going to be relevant on a board examination front, which is why when I'm going to take today's class, there are a few things that I want you to be prepared with. Yes, so first and foremost, when I am teaching, right, I'll be taking bits and pieces and I'm going to teach you at one stretch, and I will teach you for maybe 10-15 minutes at one go, and then I will stop for a doubt board session. Yes, so when I am teaching you, I need you to listen to me. It should not be that when I'm teaching you human circulatory system, you ask me questions based on transportation in plants. Or when I'm teaching you transport in plants, you are asking me questions related to lymph. So I need you to listen, right? We're going in this chronology. This is in the sequence in which I'm going to teach you today. So as and when I take those topics, please pay attention. Whatever you have not understood, I will do doubt boards. And only in the doubt board section will I be taking your doubts, so that we make this class very comprehensive. Tomorrow you want to come back and watch this video also, you will be able to watch it effortlessly and seamlessly and understand the explanation. So I hope all of us are ready for this. Yes? Are we all ready? Are we all excited? I will promise you that we will make sure that in the next few minutes, we will, cover the whole topic, right? Okay, very good all of you, very good, right? So now of course our whole session today is going to be based on transportation, right? So before we get started, Shiva, I request you to increase the font size of the comments because I'm not able to see them very clearly. I need it one size bigger. Okay, thank you so much everybody. Thank you. Yes, thank you Shiva. So now of course we are going to get started. So I hope all of us are ready. Now like I told you, today's class is going to be on transportation. Yes, and when we talk about transportation, simply like in our day-to-day lives, when we say transport, right? If I tell you that I want to have a mean of transport, what do we understand? We know that from here it means that it is going from one place to another, right? So that is as simple as what we understand as transport. It is a medium, or somehow we're able to go from one place to another. I'm getting transported from point A to point B. Now we are talking about transporting things within our body. Now there are various things that need to be transported within our body. For example, from the process and learning respiration, we know that oxygen from the lungs need to reach the cells because cells need oxygen to do respiration. Now along with that, we also know that glucose is necessary for respiration, and glucose that is there, it is finally, the food that is there is finally broken down within the digestive system. Now from digestive system, it needs to reach different parts of the body. Now there are various other nutrients also which need to reach the cells. Now along with this, within the cells, there's a lot of waste materials also which does not, needs to be transported, and it needs to be gotten rid from the body. So we see that there is a lot of things which need to get transported within the body. What are all the things? It is oxygen, it is carbon dioxide, they are your nutrients, and of course you have your nitrogenous waste materials. Now, who is responsible for transporting all of this? Yes, who is responsible or who will perform these functions? It is done by two very important systems within our body. We have cardiovascular system or your circulatory system. Then you have your lymphatic system also. So let's first understand about the cardiovascular system, or what you and I understand as the circulatory system. Now we see that the circulatory system which is there is a system that is responsible for transporting various materials. Now we know what these various materials are. It is your carbon dioxide, your oxygen, your nutrients, your waste materials, everything from one part of the body to another. So always we can understand that the circulatory system, if I compare it to a water pump system, what all does a water pump system have? A water pump system will have a pump, it will have some pipes, and of course it will have water in it. So we can make analogies for the water pump system and your circulatory system to understand this better. Now we know that the circulatory system is responsible for transporting substances. But when I asked you what is responsible for transporting substances, all of you answered telling me, ma'am, it is blood. So we know that blood is the substance, right? Blood is what actually transports these materials, these gases, digested food and everything from one part to another, right? So just like how we have the water that flows within the water pump system, we have the blood which flows within the circulatory system. Now a very quick question. What is blood? Is blood a cell? Is blood tissue? Or is blood an organ? Yes, is blood a cell, is blood a tissue, or is blood an organ? How many of you can tell me this? Very good, exactly. Blood that is there is a fluid connective tissue, right? We know that connective tissues are those tissues which connect different parts of the body together, right? They bind different parts of the body. And your blood is a fluid connective tissue because of its nature, right? We know that it is fluid in nature. So now if you look at the components of blood, we know that it has a fluid part and it has a cellular part. Now your fluid part mainly includes your plasma, right? Plasma is this yellowish fluid that is there wherein we find the cells of the blood suspended in, right? And what is the function of plasma? Very important. They can ask you for assertion reason question or they will ask you for MCQ based question, right? So these are the two kinds of questions that can come from this particular part that I am discussing, okay? So from plasma, if you talk about functions of plasma, we see that plasma is first of all the fluid substance in which all your cells are suspended, and this is mainly responsible for transporting some amount of food, right? It's responsible for transporting carbon dioxide and all the waste materials, all your nitrogenous waste materials that are there, they are transported by the plasma in dissolved form, right? Then you have your cellular part or the cells which make up the blood. And here we have RBCs, WBCs and platelets, right? So here we see that we have three kinds of cells. We have red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets. Now red blood cells that are there, we see that red blood cells are called so because they impart the red color to the blood. Reason being because they have a pigment called as hemoglobin, and we know that hemoglobin not only imparts red color, but we know that hemoglobin has high affinity. That means that it loves oxygen, which is why the primary function of the red blood cells is to transport oxygen. And we see that the red blood cells are about 5.6 to 6 million blood cells. Between 5 to 6 million blood cells we find within our body, and they have this disc-like structure so that they can efficiently transport it. Then we have white blood cells which are here. Yes. Now white blood cells of course get their name because they don't really have a pigment. And we see that these white blood cells are amoeboid in shape. That means they don't really have a fixed shape. And we see that mainly their role is to fight off pathogens, or they help in fighting off diseases, or anything that may cause harm to the body. They're responsible for getting rid of anything unwanted from the body, right? So we see that they are our white blood cells. Then we have our platelets, right? Now our platelets are very, very important. Now our platelets that are there, we see that they are responsible for the clotting of blood. So whenever there is a wound, whether it's an internal wound or an external wound, to make sure that the blood does not ooze out from the body and we experience blood loss, we see that platelets are there which play a key role in clotting of blood, right? So we see that these are the three types of blood and blood cells that are there. So far, are we all clear with this? Are we all clear with blood and blood components? Are we clear? Give me a quick thumbs up. Yes? Okay. Very good, everybody. Very good. So now we know that these are the components, right? Now we know that oxygen is transported. We know how exactly, right? We know how exactly carbon dioxide is transported. We know how waste materials are transported. Clotting of blood is basically, clotting means that whenever there is a wound, it will seal the wound, right? So think of it as sealing, like your MC. Yes? RBC is biconcave. Yes, it is biconcave. For deeper doubts, I will take doubt board, okay? I will take a doubt board. Till then, hold on. Just whatever doubts are there, just keep holding on to it. I will take it once again. Now let's move on to the next one, right? That is to understand the second component of our cardiovascular system, which is the blood vessels. Now we know blood is there and we know blood is transporting materials to different cells, right? In different parts of the body. But how is this blood moving? Now, blood is able to move because of the fact that there are pathways or there are tubular structures which help in navigating the blood. And these are these tubes which help and that allow the blood to move through them. Yes? And this is what we understand as blood vessels. Yes? Now, of course, when we talk about blood vessels, we see that within our body, we have three different kinds of blood vessels. We have arteries, we have veins, and we have capillaries. Okay? So now let's understand this in the most easiest manner, right? Now we know that your blood components or your circulatory system has blood vessels, and it has heart, right? Now your heart is the main pump that is there that pumps the blood to different parts of the body. Now the blood is moving through these tubular structures called as blood vessels. Easy peasy, simple, right? Now we see that there are some blood vessels that move away from the heart, right? So if this is my heart, there are blood vessels that go away from my heart. Now blood vessels that go away from the heart is what we call as arteries. So what are arteries? Arteries are blood vessels that transport blood away from the heart, okay? Now, because they transport blood away from the heart, we know that heart is a pump. So blood, when it pumps the blood, it goes at high pressure, which is why we see that the walls of the artery, right? So normally we see that first and foremost, blood flows through high pressure. Yes? So we see that through the arteries, they flow through high pressure because they're going away from the heart. Yes? And because of that, we see that the walls of the arteries, right? So we see that walls of the arteries that are there are very, very thick so that at the end of the day, they can flow because they need to withstand that kind of pressure, right? Which is why the walls are very thick. Now they know that normally the heart that is there needs to pump the blood towards different parts. And what does the different parts of the body mainly need? They mainly require oxygen, right? So the blood that moves through the arteries are normally rich in oxygen, or what we commonly call as oxygenated blood. So when I say oxygenated blood, it just means oxygen-rich blood, right? So primarily, or I will say mainly, they will transport oxygenated blood through them. Yes? So these are some main differences that we observe. Now, as these arteries go, right, and they reach closer and closer to cells, we see that they will branch out to form something called as arterioles, okay? So, arterioles are basically arteries which are just a little more smaller in size. They're not as big as arteries, they're a little more smaller in size, right? Their diameter is smaller and they'll keep branching out, okay? They'll branch out till a point when they're only one single cell thick, yes? So, we see that they will reach a point when they're only one single cell thick, and this is what we call as capillaries. So capillaries are the smallest and thinnest vessels which are there, which are just one single cell thick, and this is what will reach our cells. Yes, and here we see that all the oxygen that is there from the blood, it will enter into these cells. Whatever carbon dioxide that they don't require will go back into the blood vessels, right? So we see exchange happens. And now finally all the oxygen from the blood has gone into the cell so that it can be utilized for respiration. And now your blood is slowly becoming rich in carbon dioxide. So your capillaries will then start to reunite, okay? They will slowly start to reunite and they will form something called as venules. And these venules will further join and they will form veins. Now, unlike your arteries, the veins that are there are quite different because your veins are blood vessels that transport blood towards the heart, right? So they take the blood towards the heart, and we see that it's going towards the heart. It's going from different organs, and not all our organs are like the heart, no, which can pump the blood. Only heart is a pump in our body, but everything else that is there is not a pump, which is why we see that the blood flows through low pressure through the veins, and we see that the walls of the veins are thin, right? Unlike the arteries, which is thick, the walls are very thin. And here we see that they primarily transport deoxygenated blood. Now I told you that at the capillaries, gaseous exchange has taken place. So if gaseous exchange has taken place, what has happened? All your carbon dioxide has entered into the blood vessels, right? So if it's entered into the blood vessels, now they are joining and reuniting. Less oxygen, more carbon dioxide. So we say that it is deoxygenated blood. And one very important thing is that there is chances that because it's not getting pumped, blood can go backwards also, right? There is no momentum which is pushing it. So because of this reason, we also see that veins have valves. Now what are valves? Imagine valves to be like those doors which open only in one direction. It cannot open in the other direction. Even if you want it to open in the other direction, it will not open, right? It will only open towards one direction. So we see that the valves that are there are like one-way doors. So they will allow movement this way, but if the blood wants to go backwards, it will not allow you. It will not open this way. It will remain shut. So valves make sure that they prevent backflow of blood. Yes? While we see that arteries that are there have no valves. Yes? So here mainly on an examination point of view from this particular topic, again you will get assertion reason questions. You will get MCQ based questions also. They can ask you assertion reason based questions for 1 mark, and normally from this particular topic you will get. So please make sure you put a star mark next to this topic as I have explained it. So this was all about blood vessels and difference between arteries and veins. Yeah, right? So are we all clear? So far whatever we have discussed, are we all clear? Why arteries don't have valves? Because see, arteries carry blood away from the heart, right? So heart is already pumping the blood at high pressure and it is constantly pumping it, which is why there is no chance of backflow. Even if they want backflow to happen, we see that there will be no backflow. Yes? So that is one reason. Now many of you have a doubt between plasma and you have a doubt between blood, right? Now understand that blood that is there, okay? Blood that is there is made up of plasma and cells. That means plasma is a part of blood. But what is blood or what is this plasma? It is the fluid yellowish part which is there, right? Some of you ask me, ma'am, why is it yellowish in color? Because of the components which are present in the plasma. And we see that mainly it is responsible for transporting various hormones, it's transporting various, nutrients, lot of, lot of proteins are transported. It's a matrix, yes? So because of the various components, Vaishnav, we see that it is going to be in this manner. Krisha, 1 hour. Ma'am, do veins have valves? Okay, the doubts are going very fast in front of me, so I'm just going to open my chat to view this. Blood and lymph, Ujjwal. Once I finish lymph, I will teach you what is it. What is the meaning of biconcave? Okay, what do we mean by biconcave? Biconcave is when it is bent on both sides like this, right? So it has a disc-like structure. That is what we mean as biconcave to many who asked me. What are valves? Valves are nothing but they are flap-like structures, right? So we see that they are flap-like structures which open only in one way. Akshara, is plasma responsible for formation of lymph? Yes, right, it is, but it cannot be counted as a function and I will tell you why. If veins and arteries junction at capillaries, so there is oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mixes. You can't say that it mixes there. Because see, it's kind of like how in your alveoli, when you say gaseous exchange happens, do we really say that there is mixing of blood happening? Because like I told you, there is a flow, there is a push by the heart so that it goes in one direction. Okay, but there is no mixing. It's like everything is going in this direction. Blood is constantly going like this, and just at this particular point at the capillaries, we see that gaseous exchange is happening. Are you understanding? Imagine things are just flowing and at that particular point some exchange happened and that's all. Okay? Ma'am, if cells make up blood vessels, don't they also perform cellular respiration? Oh, very good question. But when you talk about your epithelial cells and all of that, their primary function is to provide protection, right? So we see that at some level, in order to carry out their basic functions, they do utilize oxygen. Amoeboid means they don't have a proper shape, right? They have a amoeboid shape. Capillaries are thin wall vessels, right? Tiny amoeboid is no definite shape. Yes? So now of course moving on, right? We know that veins. Okay, ma'am, veins have valves as blood may flow backwards due to low pressure, or can we say that due to gravity? No, it is due to low pressure mainly. Low pressure and the fact that organs are not pushing it, right? We know that organs that are there are not pumps. Your liver is not a pump, your stomach is not a pump, but your heart is a pump. So only your heart is able to pump the blood, right? Ma'am, whether capillaries are part of arteries as they end? No, we don't say that they are part of arteries, but because see, structurally they are quite different from the arteries. But we see that capillaries emerge. I'm sorry, you were talking about capillaries. The capillaries that are there, they emerge from the arterioles. You can say that. Why deoxygenated, oxygenated should be transported separately, I will tell you now. Arterioles are basically smaller vessels which branch off from the arteries. Why arteries are deep-seated? Because they flow through high pressure. And if you get a cut or a wound, right, if it was on the surface and you get a cut or a wound, the blood will splurt out and you will lose a large amount of blood, which is why they need to be more deep-seated and protected. Yes? Lymph and blood, when I teach lymph, I will teach you the difference, okay? What are arterioles and venules? Arterioles are smaller vessels of arteries, venules are smaller vessels of vein, okay? Now let's move on. Shall we move on to the next topic? Shall we go on to the last part? Because see, we need to cover a lot of things today, right? So let's quickly go ahead and have a look at the next part, which is heart, okay? Now we'll quickly move on to this particular portion and let's understand about the heart. Now when we are going to learn about heart, we are going to learn about structure of heart, and I will teach you the function and double circulation side by side. And only then I am going to see, lot of you are asking me about the question on different bifurcation of oxygenated and deoxygenated. I will tell you about that as well, right? So here quickly we're going to move on. Veins are not green in color. They are not green. See, for representation, veins impart a bluish green color because of, like we represented in that manner, right? But not green per se. Let's move on to learning about the structure of the heart, right? So now so far I told you when I explained about the arteries and the veins and when I spoke to you about blood, at the end of the day they're all revolving around this pumping organ, which is the heart. And we know that the heart that is there is located in the thoracic, it is located in the chest cavity, it is protected by the rib cage, it is found sitting between the lungs, right? It's found sitting between both the lungs, and they are just the size of our fist. The heart is just the size of the fist. And we see that the heart is made up of a specialized tissue which is called as the cardiac muscle, right? So here we see that they are made up of cardiac muscles. And now these cardiac muscles have a rhythmic, which means that they are constantly contracting and relaxing. And here we see that there is a rhythmic contraction and relaxation. Yes, so we see that there is a rhythmic contraction and relaxation, and we see that the heart that is there is protected by the pericardium that is there, okay? So now let's understand a little bit more about the structure of the heart. Yes, now when we learn about the structure of the heart, we see that there are chambers within the heart, and in the human body we see that there are 4 chambers. Yes, so we see that there are 4 chambers, which is why we see that there is a 4-chambered heart. Now here we see that there are 2 upper chambers, So we see that there are two upper chambers, and we also observe that there are two lower chambers. Now the upper chambers that are there, I commonly refer to them as the receiving chambers. Yes, which means that the upper chambers receive blood, while the lower chambers which are there, I can say that they are responsible for pumping the blood. Yes, simple and easy. Now the upper chambers that receive the blood are called as atria, right? So we call them as atria, or if I refer to a single one, I will call them as atrium. While on the other hand, the lower chambers which are there for pumping, we see that these are the ventricles that are there. So we see that these are responsible for pumping. Simple, right? Atrium, ventricles. Now, if you look at it, we also see that the heart is also bifurcated as right and left. So, I can draw two boxes like this also. We see that it is bifurcated into right side and left side. So, here we see that we have right, and here we see that we have the left side. So, technically, if you see, the receiving chamber on the right side is the right atrium. Then we see that the pumping chamber on the right side is the right ventricle. Similarly, we have the left atrium and we have the left ventricle. So that is how you end up having these four chambers. Now, what is the speciality of right and left side? Now, right side that is there of the heart primarily receive deoxygenated blood. So all the deoxygenated blood which is collected by the veins will come and they get poured into the right side. And we see that all the veins that are there will ultimately join these two large veins of our body, which is the vena cava. Now we see that we have superior vena cava, which brings in all the deoxygenated blood from the upper parts. Then we see that you have the inferior vena cava, which brings in all the deoxygenated blood from the lower side. And here we see that the right side or the right atrium will receive all of this blood. Now from here we see that it will go into the right ventricle. Now when it goes into the right ventricle, now your ventricle will pump it. Now you have deoxygenated blood. What are we going to do with deoxygenated blood? We need to get rid of it, right? We need to get rid of the carbon dioxide and our body needs more oxygen. So this right ventricle will now pump this blood to the lungs. And we see that there are two very special blood vessels that play a key role. Yes? And that is the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins. Now your right ventricle that is there will pump deoxygenated blood. Yes, it will pump deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary arteries and it will take it to the lungs. Okay. Now what is so special? What is so special about pulmonary artery? Why am I saying that these are two very special blood vessels that I'm talking about? What is so special about the pulmonary artery? The reason being is that it is an exception. Very good. Now when I spoke to you about arteries, I told you arteries that are there mainly transport blood away from the heart and they primarily transport oxygenated blood. But at this case, we see that pulmonary artery is the only artery in the body that transports deoxygenated blood. Now it goes to the lungs and we know what happens in the lungs. Your alveoli are there, gaseous exchange will happen. So now your gaseous exchange has taken place and all the oxygen rich blood has come. So now we see that oxygenated blood is transported from the lungs to the heart. So we see that these are blood vessels going towards the heart, which is your vein. And we see that pulmonary, because it's coming from the lungs, it's called as pulmonary, right? Pulmonary artery, blood vessel going to lungs. Pulmonary vein coming from the lungs, yes? So we see that pulmonary veins bring in oxygenated blood and your left side receives it. So left side that is there receives your oxygenated blood, right? So we see that oxygenated blood comes here. And from here we see that it moves into the left ventricle. and the left ventricle that is there, we see that it pumps the blood to different parts of the body through one of the largest arteries that are there, which is the aorta. And we see that because it does such a very big job, we see that the left ventricle is slightly more muscular when compared to the right ventricle, right? So we see that the walls that are there of the left ventricle are slightly more muscular because they have to pump a lot of blood, right? So this is one main function that you see. So with this, if you see, we've understood the flow of blood. Blood comes from vena cava, and then we see that it goes into the right we see that then it comes into the it goes into the right atrium. From right atrium, it goes into right ventricle. From right ventricle, it goes into pulmonary artery, then our lungs, and then finally from lungs, left atrium, left ventricle, aorta. So simply what we have done is we have discussed circulation of blood. Now throughout, if you see, the same blood has entered into the heart twice. And this same blood, when it enters into the heart twice, we call this as double circulation. Simple, easy peasy understanding, right? So double circulation is when we see that the same blood goes twice. And we see that one circulation, right, happens just between the heart and the lungs, which we call as the pulmonary circuit. Then we see that one happens between the heart and the body, which we call as systemic circuit. So with this, if you see, we've not only learned about function of heart, but we've also learned about the functioning, the double circulation process simultaneously. Now here you need to understand, there's a very good question that I want to take up right here because it can come for 2 marks as a give reason, or it can come for assertion reason also. If you notice, we saw that there is a separation between the right side, and we see that there is a separation between the left side. That means we see that there is separation between the deoxygenated blood, and of course we see that there is separation with oxygenated. Now why should we separate oxygenated and deoxygenated? Why not mix it, right? Why should we mix this particular thing? It's simply because this separation of blood allows efficient supply of oxygen. Now you imagine I have an efficient system where all my waste is going separately, all my clean water is going separately. Now if my clean water is moving separately, that means it's efficiently getting transported. So we see that this separation of right and left side, or separation of deoxygenated and oxygenated, ensures that there is efficient supply of oxygen to different parts. And especially in birds and in mammals, right? In birds and mammals, we mainly observe this 4-chambered heart, and we observe this separation of right side and left side. Now the reason why this is specific to birds and mammals is because in birds and mammals, we see that our body has a constant body temperature. We have a constant body temperature, and we see that our body does not keep changing. The body temperature does not change with respect to the surroundings, but rather we maintain it so that it's always kept at constant. Now, in order to achieve this, right, a large amount of energy is required. High amount of energy is needed for this, which is why we need to have efficient oxygen supply for the same, right, for that balance to be maintained. Now, this is very, very important, this particular topic. It is mentioned in your textbook also. Just next to double circulation, they have mentioned why double circulation is necessary, which is why you need to make sure that you put a star mark, because you can get questions from this particular topic. Yes? Are we all clear? Now, many of you have doubts with single circulation also, right? Some of you have doubts with single circulation. Let's understand that maybe with respect to other organisms, right? How is it that there are circulation, or how is it that circulation that is there differs in other organisms? For example, when you take in the case of fishes, right? In the case of fishes that are there, we see that fishes, amphibians, reptiles, first and foremost, all of them are cold-blooded organisms, okay? Now, what do I mean by they are cold-blooded? That means that their body temperature does not, it actually keeps changing with respect to the surroundings. They don't have a fixed body temperature like us. It keeps changing, which is why with respect to this, we see that their way of circulation is quite different. So if you look at Pisces and everything, no, they have actually single circulation. They don't have double circulation. So here what happens is that at the gills that are there, we see that they have a two-chambered heart first of all. We see that they have one atrium and they have one ventricle. And then we see that from the ventricle, we see that the arteries will actually pump deoxygenated blood. But what happens is that when it reaches, no, the arteries will first go to gills. Gills may we know gaseous exchange takes place. So there at the gills we see that gaseous exchange happens, and then from there oxygenated blood is transported to different parts of the body. Then we see that all the deoxygenated blood is collected and then taken to the heart. So your heart technically receives only deoxygenated blood in the case of fishes, and they are just responsible for pumping it to the gills for oxygenation. So that is single circulation. Are we clear? Are you all clear with single circulation? Yes, but in the case of amphibians like frogs, we observe that they have a three-chambered heart, where we see that they have two atria. Okay, they have one right atria and left atria, but they have only single ventricle. They have only one ventricle. So in ventricles, what happens is that there is mixing of blood. Similarly, in reptiles also what we observe, no, they don't have a proper, even though reptiles we see that they have like a four-chambered heart, but they don't really have it because the ventricle that is there is not fully partitioned like ours, right? We see that there is still mixing of blood that we observe. And when mixing of blood happens, no, we see that it's not very efficient, which is why we see that when compared to other organisms, our body is more efficient with a four-chambered heart. Yes? And one last topic to keep in mind on an examination front is blood pressure. Now, what is blood pressure? You would have heard this especially in old people, right? Oh, you are taking so much stress. Your blood pressure has increased. So what is this blood pressure? Blood pressure is the force which is exerted on the walls of the artery. Now, why am I saying arteries? Because we know that heart pumps the blood and arteries are blood vessels which transport blood away from the heart. So we see that when it pumps the blood, it exerts a certain force. And that force is exerted on the walls, right? Which is why we see that the force which is exerted on the walls of the blood vessel is what we call as blood pressure. And a sphygmomanometer is what we use in order to measure the blood vessels. Yes? Okay, so now everybody very quickly, I have two more topics to cover. Probably I might take another 10-20 more minutes. But now so far are we all clear? Yes? What is the function of cardiac muscles? The cardiac muscles will ensure that the heart is constantly beating. It will continuously beat right from when we are born till our very last breath, right? And cardiac muscles will efficiently keep contracting and relaxing without actually tiring themselves out, right? Okay, ma'am, how does gaseous exchange happen at capillaries? See, these are your cells, right? So we see that these are your cells. The capillaries which are there, no, they'll come like this. They'll surround the cells. Okay. Now, when they surround the cells in this manner, here we see that it's again based, gaseous exchange happens on the concept of diffusion only, where it goes from high concentration to low concentration, right? So we see that it goes again from high concentration to low concentration and vice versa. It's as simple as that. Heart does not get fatigued. No, unless and until we see that there is a healthy heart, right? Again, let me stress on that. A healthy heart will not face fatigue. It is responsible. It's Sorry, we see that a healthy heart at the end of the day is, of course, something that can constantly beat. Role of left ventricle is to pump the blood to different parts of the body, right? Ma'am, reptiles are cold-blooded. Yes, they are cold-blooded. Ma'am, pulmonary and systemic circuit. Pulmonary circuit is between heart and lungs. So whenever you hear the word pulmon, always remember that it is between heart and lungs. This is pulmonary, right? But if it is between heart and body, then it is systemic. Yes? Ma'am, if Joe Anthony asked me relevant questions. Ma'am, we continuously experience circulation or double circulation? We continuously experience double circulation. Yes? Yes, very good question on valves, right? So now that's a small thing that I missed out. See, in our heart also, if you see as it goes from right atrium to right ventricle or from right ventricle to pulmonary artery, we see that just to ensure that there is no backflow of blood, we also observe that there are various different kinds of valves. But in NCERT, they don't focus upon the types of valves, but nonetheless, Ankita ma'am would have taken that part in greater detail. But like I said, I'm just going to give you a brief overview with respect to your board examination. Yes? Ma'am, why vein isn't mentioned in blood pressure? For the same reason that the blood flows through low pressure in veins. There's no lot of large, pressure exerted in the veins, which is why we don't measure blood pressure with respect to veins. Yes? Tricuspid, yes. Tricuspid valves are on the right side with 3 flaps. Bicuspid on the left side between left atrium and left ventricle with 2 flaps. Function of atria, they do nothing. No, they receive the blood. So they receive the blood, and when they contract, when the atria contract, only then it will move. So it's not like atria don't have function, they're just chuma sitting there. They will receive blood and push the blood, right, Akshara? Okay. Ma'am, nutrients are absorbed into the blood, but by which blood vessel does this absorption happen? So mainly if you think about it, your capillaries that are there, at every time when you learn about villi, you say that there are blood capillaries. So again, there is absorption into capillaries and then they are transported, okay? Yes. Low blood pressure and high blood pressure. See, so basically blood pressure is when it contracts and it relaxes. High blood pressure is when the values are higher than 120, right? When it goes to 130, that is high. But when it dips below, when the higher, your systolic pressure itself is lower, we call it as low pressure. Does plasma take CO2 from the body, from the cells it takes, right? Yes, okay. Bicuspid and tricuspid are valves, right? Okay. Ma'am, both right and left ventricle exert force, or why thick or thin? See, they're not exactly the same. You're right, the walls of the left ventricle are slightly thicker than that of the right because they have to pump the blood. Or I would say that the walls of the ventricles are thicker when compared to the atria because they have to perform the function of thickening, right? Yes, you can hear it with a stethoscope, alright? So everybody, with this, are we all clear? On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are we feeling with respect to circulatory system? Because after this, we have 2 more topics to cover, which is lymphatic system and of course, which is going to be transport in plants, right? What is the confidence level? Very quickly, I want you all to tell me. Yes? 10 out of 10. Sphygmomanometer AV, it is sphygmomanometer. Important topics from the beginning I will tell you towards the end, okay? That I will tell you towards the end. Role of bicuspid and tricuspid, they are valves which prevent the backflow of blood, right? Very good. So are we all ready to learn the next topic, which is lymph and lymphatic system? Yes? How many of you here are very confused with lymph and lymphatic system? Because I know that this is a very simple and easy topic, but when it comes to understanding the basics of lymph and lymphatic system, we get very confused, right? We tend to get very, very confused. Very good, I understand. No, I completely understand that a lot of you will be confused here, which is why next 5 minutes I will make sure that you learn about the lymph and lymphatic system. Shritama's diastole and diastolic pressure. See, diastole means relaxation. The pressure exerted during that time is diastolic pressure. It's as simple as that. See, Ankita ma'am has taken that topic in detail, which is why when it came to cardiac cycle, I did not touch it because Ankita ma'am had actually taken that part in greater detail. And I'll not be able to finish all the topics at one go in 1 hour, which is why there are some topics which I have touched upon briefly. But whatever is relevant on a board examination front, I have taught you in super duper in detail, right? So you have nothing to worry about. Okay. So now let's understand a little bit more about what is this lymph and what is this lymphatic system, okay? Now we know circulatory system, see, understanding circulatory system is very easy, right? Actually, if you think about it, it's very, very simple and easy in a lot of ways. But let's go back to our capillaries, okay? So let's go back to the capillaries wherein we see that there is blood flowing. Now what do we know about our capillaries? We know that in our capillaries that are there, we see that the blood vessels are thin, right? They are thin walled and we see that they are only one single cell thick. And we know that our capillaries surround our cells. Yes? So we see that they surround our cells. But capillaries have one small problem. Capillaries are actually leaky. Okay, what do I mean by leaky? How many of you have noticed that in your house there will be some one pipe which will be dripping, no? Water will be flowing through it, but somewhere, some hole, something will be there and water will be slowly dripping. We have all observed this. On top, upar se, there will be water dripping. Then what will you do? You will be like, oh, I don't want to waste the water. So maybe you will go keep one bucket, or your parents will tell you, either we will seal it, or normally in most Indian households, what's going to happen is we will take one bucket, keep it under it, collect all that water. It's as simple as that, right? So think about that leaky pipe inside your body. That within our body, within the cells, we see that there is some leaking which is happening. But what leaks out? We see that what actually leaks out is the plasma, and we see that the WBCs can leak out. And why the WBCs are able to leak out? Because of their shape. They have amoeboid shape, so they are able to ooze out through these gaps. Yes? So we see that plasma and WBCs have oozed out. Now what has happened? They have gone outside and they are surrounding the cells, right? So if you see, if these are my cells, okay? These are all my cells. And my plasma that is there, my plasma and WBCs, they are surrounding my cells. So because they are surrounding my cells outside the cells, they are not even inside, they are outside. So they are extracellular because they are outside the cells, and it's a fluid, so I will call it extracellular fluid. Or I can say that this is present between the cells, so I can say it is intercellular. Or what we often call, to make things easy, is we call it as tissue fluid. Now if my pipe is constantly leaking, if we see that if constantly things are oozing out, what happens? If it is oozing out, it's not like it will constantly be outside and surrounding the cells, right? We see that at some point it needs to be drained out, it needs to be collected. Somebody has to keep a bucket, right? So here it's not that if it oozes out, it will remain surrounding the cells. At some point, all of this has to be collected and poured back into some other place. It cannot constantly be surrounding the cells, right? So we see that when it oozes out, it goes into a separate channel, which is what we call as a lymphatic vessel. And this fluid, which is mainly made up of plasma, WBCs, proteins, we call it as lymph, right? So mainly we see that the composition of lymph is 94% water, it has proteins, it has different types of WBCs, and it has antibodies. Now what is a major function of lymph? The major function of lymph is to transport some important components like absorbed fat. It is also responsible for draining excess fluid as well. So mainly, if you ask about the main difference between blood and lymph, right? So first and foremost, we see that color-wise, blood has red color while this is colorless, right? And function-wise, we know that blood is responsible for transporting oxygen, carbon dioxide, other nutrients. Here we see that mainly they are responsible for transporting digested and absorbed fat, right? So we see that here they are mainly responsible for transporting digested and absorbed fats. Now on this side, when we again talk about how they move, we know that blood moves through blood vessels, while here we see that the lymph that is there moves through lymphatic vessels. And finally, we see that all these lymphatic vessels will then join a larger vein and then they will go. Yes? So are we all clear? Are we clear with what is lymph and what is blood? Now we know the difference. Now we know how exactly they are different, and now we know how they are formed. Yes? If the screen is not clear, I request all of you to quickly go and ensure that you change the settings in your phone. You will be able to see it, right? Okay. Very good, very good. For home, ma'am, where this lymph goes? Lymph goes into lymphatic vessels, which will finally join the larger veins that are there. And lymph nodes are certain points, right? So we see that lymph nodes that are there, they are certain points wherein we see that there is collection or drainage of lymph that happens. Yes? Where all do lymphatic vessels open? They finally open into larger veins. That is what we mean by it. Krisha, I've actually gone very slowly in explaining lymph. You can rewind back this part once again and you can watch it. Yes? Ma'am, why doesn't lymph clot? Oh, very good question. Because see, it is not, these leaky channels that are there are inherently part of the body. So platelets does not detect that as a problem, right? It's they just detect it as a part of the body. But when there is a wound, right, only when there's a detection of a wound, only then the platelet will go. If it does not detect the wound, then it will not go. It is as simple as that, right? Yes. If it oozes out, how does it form again? Akshara, at the end of the day, I told you, no, those lymph vessels will join back. So they are basically getting circulated out. So even if they're oozing out, they ooze out through the capillaries, then they will go into lymphatic vessel, but finally they will join the veins. So they are getting circulated. Yes? Okay, where exactly lymph is there? Lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes. Yes, we will do line by line explanation also. Don't worry. We will go line by line. We will do NCERT reading. So don't worry about it. So now on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are we feeling about lymph? On a scale of 1 to 10, what is our confidence level with lymph? Ma'am, if WBC is student Ash. Okay, very good question you have asked me. Would lymph also ooze out as... Okay, good question. See, it depends, right? Normally what happens is that it's mainly our blood that oozes out where we get hurt, not normally lymph, right? Ma'am, if WBC is carried by artery and if we cut our hand, veins... So, see, WBCs have this very good property. I told you, no, WBCs can ooze out. They can squeeze through small spaces. So what happens is that if they are in veins, if vein gets cut or wherever damage happens, no, this WBC can ooze out first. They'll come and they will fight. And in the lower parts of it, we see that if at all the blood vessel gets clogged, your platelets are there to seal it. Yes? WBCs are your white blood cells that are there. Okay. So now students, of course, with this I am going to move on to the last topic. That is transportation necessary in plants, and is transport something that we need to understand? So will you all give me 5 more minutes of your time, because I know you have another class? Yes, but in 5 to 10 minutes, I am going to explain the importance of transportation in plants. Now, this particular topic, surprisingly, as much as you might think, oh ma'am, circulatory system looks very interesting and hoo-ha and has a lot of, interesting components. So CBSE will actually ask me a lot of questions. But to your surprise, transportation in plants is also very important. And they ask you good number of questions, especially assertion reason questions. You get MCQ based questions. You get 2-mark questions from this topic. So this topic right here is very, very important. Short questions will come from this topic. So you need to understand a few basic pointers that I am going to stress upon, and you just need to mark it in your textbook. Yes? Because transportation in plants especially is not something that we have not learnt before. We've learned about it in our lower grades. But there are some technicalities which we need to learn so that it becomes easy, right? This right here is absolutely not a hard topic. It's actually a very, very easy topic. Yes? Lymphatic system, lymph is present. I just told you about it as lymphatic system, Ujjwal. It is present in NCERT. It is there. Okay? So let's understand a little bit more on transportation in plants. Now we know that in our body there is nutrient, oxygen, carbon dioxide, everything. But do you think that there are materials which need to be transported within the plants? Yes or no? Are there materials that actually have to be transported within the plants? Exactly, there are materials which have to be transported, because we know that for photosynthesis, we know that water which is absorbed by the roots, it needs to be transported to the upper parts. Then we know that there are various food which is synthesized within the leaves that also needs to be transported to different parts of the body. We know there's amino acids, we know that there are proteins, there are so many things which are there, right? So we know that there are various components that have to be transported. So there are water and necessary nutrients that need to be transported to different parts of the body in order for its survival. Which is why for transportation in plants to take place, we see that there are vascular bundles, right? So we observe that there are vascular bundles which help in this. Now what are vascular bundles? Vascular bundles are nothing but your transporting units, right? So we see that these are nothing but your transporting units. units, which include two kinds of complex permanent tissue, that is xylem and phloem, right? So we see that it includes xylem and phloem. So let's understand xylem and phloem. Aishwarya, I will take your question in just a bit, right? Now xylem that is there is a complex permanent tissue which is made up of four kinds of cells, right? It's made up of tracheids, it's made up of xylem vessels, it's made up of xylem parenchyma and xylem fibers. And we know that these tracheids and vessels which are there play a very important role in transporting water. And we see that water that is absorbed by the roots is now transported to the upper parts. And we see that it is one-way directional. That means the transport through xylem is unidirectional. It is only one way. Now, what exactly helps or facilitates this unidirectional transport through xylem? So for that, we need to understand a little bit on how exactly the water is absorbed and transported. Now we know that if I go under the ground, right, I have my root hair, and we know that root hair is very, very thin, right? So we see that it's very extremely thin walled, and we see that it is absorbed into the root. Now, along with this, we also see that there are a lot of minerals. There's a lot of ions also which are absorbed by the roots. Now, when ions are absorbed by the roots, it actually creates a concentration difference, right? So, we see that there is a concentration difference which gets created. Yes? So what effectively happens is that as all these minerals and everything get absorbed, we know that there is difference in amount of water that is there from say outside the cell to inside the cell. So if you look at one cell, we see that now there will be more ions here when compared to outside. So water will move in. Now similarly, we see that when I compare cell 1 to cell 2, again we see that there is a difference. So from cell to cell, we see that water moves in, right? So we see that from cell to cell, water moves in, and eventually it creates a pressure within the roots, and we call this pressure as root pressure. Now, how is root pressure happening? Through osmosis, exactly. Root pressure gets generated, and this pressure that gets generated will also allow or aid in the transport of water. So at one point in smaller plants, right, or not very, small plants, we see that this kind of happens. Yes, it's not active transport. Active transport is for the minerals, but osmosis happens for the water, right? Osmosis is movement of water from a region of high concentration to low concentration. So that happens. Now, ultimately, we see that it will then end up reaching the vascular bundles, and through tracheids and vessels, we see that it will then get transported. Now, in the same plant, especially in higher plants, Kushi, like for example in angiosperms, we find tracheids and vessels. But in lower plants, you may not find both. You might find only one, right? So basically, this is how transport happens. Maybe not very tall plants and moderately, smaller plants that are there. But what about taller plants? Is root pressure alone enough? Root pressure alone will not suffice in the case of very tall trees. Here another physical force comes into the picture, which is transpiration. Yes? So we know that transpiration that is there is nothing but, what is transpiration? Transpiration is nothing but loss of water in the form of water vapor from the aerial parts of the plant. Now, what do I mean by aerial parts? From the leaves, right? So we see that through the stomata, we see that there is loss of water in the form of water vapor. Now, when there is loss of water that happens through, you can call it like evaporation, right? It's kind of like evaporation. Why does it lose water? It loses water because it is excess water, Mansa. This is excess water that is there, which the plant does not want, right? At this point, it does not want. So when this transpiration happens, we see that it creates a suction force, right? So for example, how you will take a straw and you will suck, right? When you suck, we see that it creates a vacuum, it creates a suction force. Now a very similar suction force gets created when transpiration takes place, and the water from the roots is then transported all the way to the upper parts. So normally in the case of tall trees, due to transpiration, along with root pressure, transpiration pull also plays a key role in transport of water, right? So questions can come from transpiration pull and root pressure. So please put a star mark. And how exactly does it happen? Because of cell to cell cell movement, right? So due to movement of ions and concentration difference, water moves from one cell to another, and that's eventually how it enters the vascular bundles, right? So this is how your water enters and how exactly transpiration pull takes place. Now, in which part of the plant does it happen? Now, mainly your leaves which are there, through the stomata it can happen. In the stem, we see that there are lenticels through which transpiration can happen as well, right? Very, very simple and easy. Now, of course, this was all about xylem, that is transport of water. But what about in the case of phloem? How exactly does or how do you think, right? How do you think that phloem here plays a key role? Yes? Or how does phloem help in transport? Now, phloem, of course, what is there? We see that phloem is responsible for transporting food materials to different parts of the body. So we see that phloem is made up of sieve tubes, phloem parenchyma, phloem fibers, and companion cells, right? So we also observe companion cells here, and they transport food. Now, interestingly, transport is bidirectional in phloem. That means that it can transport to both upper parts and to both lower parts. Now, in phloem, transport of food is very interesting, and the process of transport of food is what we call as translocation. Now, earlier when I spoke to you about transport of water, there was no mention of ATP or energy. I told you they were all very physical forces. But here we're talking about use of energy or use of ATP. So here in this case, we see that when transport takes place, there is usage of ATP. So normally food within phloem is transported in the form of sucrose, right? So we see that sucrose that is there is transported through the phloem. And we see that for sucrose, so if this is my cell, right? Let's assume this is my leaf cell. It will transport my sucrose, which is a kind of carbohydrate, using ATP, right? It will use ATP and it will transport it into phloem. Now, when all my sucrose enters into the phloem, we see that now there's a lot of solute. While when compared to my xylem, we see that there's a lot of water in the xylem. But now with respect to this, we also see that there's concentration difference. So some amount of water will now move into the phloem. Now, because this water moves into it, right? Why does the water move in? Due to osmotic pressure, right? There is a concentration difference. It creates osmotic pressure. And we see that all this water that is there will now slowly start moving into the phloem. And as the water moves in, this movement will actually push all your sucrose molecules into different parts of the body. So technically in this part we see that translocation happens. So now of course with this, if you see, I have covered the whole chapter, the full concept of transportation in 1 hour, right? Now I know that I've gone a little bit slow and I've spoken to you about all the important concepts, all the important questions that will come from a board examination point of view. But any of you have any doubts so far? Yes? Ma'am, pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood. Yes, Aman, it does. Can transpiration happen through roots? Normally no, because mainly transpiration happens through aerial parts, right? Cushy, like I said, tracheids and vessels can be part of the same plant, especially in angiosperms. Can be related? Yes, we can. We can. Okay? Are we all clear? Very good, all of you. Very, very good. Yes? So any of you have any doubts so far, you can let me know in the comments of this video, right? You can let me know there also, in case after the live you have watched it and you still have some doubts, let me know in the comments of this video. But I hope transportation in plants is clear to all of you. Yes? Sucrose is basically a type of carbohydrate which is made up of 2 glucose molecules, right? Aerial parts are upper parts. They're just upper parts. It's a type of carbohydrate. Osmotic pressure is basically concentration difference that is there, which makes osmosis to happen. Why do we use the word pulmonary? We say pulmonary because pulmon means lungs, right? Pulmon means lungs, which is why we say pulmonary. Is it the same in desert plants? There is slight differences in the mechanism, but more or less the same, okay? Alright, so here's a quick homework question for all of you, and this is a very important question. Why is it necessary to separate oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in mammals and birds? let me know in the comments of this video, because I will be checking your answers, right? So let me know in the comments of this video, and please make sure that if you like this video, you don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, right? Because at the end of the day, Byju's 9th and 10th has always got you covered. So thank you so much for being a part of today's class. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much, students, for being a part of today's class. I will see you soon, but up until then, everybody, take care, lots of love, and bye-bye.